It is a treasure of almost mythical status, one of the most important single artifacts in human history. But it is not a golden mask or a magnificent sword. It is this, a small, crude, bean-shaped lump of pale whitish gold, no bigger than a thumbnail. Stamped onto its face is the simple, roaring head of a lion. This is the Lydian Lion, the world's first true coin. It is arguably the most influential invention you have never thought about. This unassuming piece of metal did more than just replace the clumsy systems of the past. It unleashed a technological and political revolution. This is the story of how the invention of a promise, a state's guarantee of value, supercharged the ancient economy, created a new model of government, and rewrote the very rules of human civilization.
To understand the Lydian Revolution, we must first imagine a world without money. Not a world without wealth, but a world where every single transaction was a crisis of trust, a complex and inefficient negotiation. For millennia, human economy had been governed by two deeply flawed systems. The first was barter, the direct exchange of goods for other goods. It was a logistical nightmare. A farmer with a surplus of grain who wanted a new clay pot had to find a potter who not only had a spare pot, but who also happened to be in immediate need of grain. It was a system crippled by what economists call the double coincidence of wants. A more advanced system, which dominated the Bronze Age, was the use of weighed bullion. Precious metals like gold and silver, particularly fragments known as hacksilver, became a medium of exchange. This was a major leap forward, but it was still profoundly inefficient. Every transaction required a set of scales. The merchant had to weigh the metal, but he also had to trust its purity. Was this silver adulterated with lead? Was the scale rigged? Every payment had to be tested, weighed, and argued over. Commerce was a slow, cumbersome, and deeply personal affair, a world without standardized prices, without pocket change, and without the velocity needed for a truly dynamic economy. Into this world of friction and mistrust, a solution was born. In a small but fabulously wealthy kingdom at the crossroads of the ancient world, Lydia. Located in modern-day Western Turkey, Lydia was a bridge connecting the great ancient empires of the East with the dynamic, emerging city-states of the Greek West. And it possessed a unique geological gift, the Pactolus River, whose legendary sands were rich with a naturally occurring pale yellow alloy of gold and silver called electrum. This investigation will argue that the Lydians, through a combination of geographic luck and political genius, harnessed this resource to solve the ancient world's crisis of trust. We will deconstruct their revolutionary invention, showing that the true innovation was not the metal, but the stamp, the state's guarantee that transformed a simple lump of bullion into a trusted, fungible unit of account. We will explore how this single piece of technology acted as a great accelerator, supercharging ancient trade, enabling systematic taxation, and funding the rise of professional armies. And we will trace how this powerful idea went viral, conquering the ancient world and creating the fundamental blueprint for our own economic reality. This is the story of how a tiny, roaring lion changed the world.
Before we can appreciate the sheer genius of the Lydian Revolution, we must first confront the immense difficulty of the world it replaced. For thousands of years, from the first agricultural villages to the great Bronze Age empires, human societies functioned without anything that we would recognize as money. It was a world governed by the tyranny of the scale and the chaos of the barter yard, an economy shackled by inefficiency, inconvenience, and above all, a profound and pervasive lack of trust. Every single transaction,
from the purchase of a loaf of bread to the payment of an imperial tribute, was a complex and often adversarial negotiation, a state of commercial friction that placed a hard limit on the potential growth of civilization. The oldest and most basic form of exchange was, of course, barter, the direct, cashless trade of one good or service for another. On a small village level, this system could function. A farmer could exchange a surplus of grain for a pot from the local potter, or a pair of sandals from the local leather worker. This was an economy based on personal relationships, on reputation, and on the simple, immediate needs of a small community. But as societies grew and trade routes lengthened, the inherent flaws of the barter system became a crippling brake on economic development. The central problem was what economists call the double coincidence of wants. A transaction could only occur if two parties each happened to possess a surplus of something the other desired at the exact same time and in the exact same place. An Egyptian merchant arriving in the Levant with a cargo of grain who wanted to acquire Lebanese cedar wood had to find a timber merchant who was not only willing to sell his cedar, but who also happened to be in immediate need of a massive quantity of Egyptian grain. If the timber merchant needed copper, not grain, the deal would collapse, unless a third party, a copper merchant in need of grain, could be found to create a complex and cumbersome triangular trade. Furthermore, the problem of divisibility was immense. How many chickens is a cow worth? And what if you only need one chicken's worth of cow? Barter was a logistical and cognitive nightmare, a system that actively resisted complexity, scale, and the creation of a true market economy. To solve these problems, ancient civilizations developed a more sophisticated system, the use of weighed precious metals as a medium of exchange. In the great empires of Mesopotamia and the Near East, silver and to a lesser extent gold became the standard. But this was not yet money, it was bullion. It circulated not as standardized coins, but as a chaotic assortment of scrap metal, cut pieces of jewelry, bent ingots, flattened rings, and odd lumps, a form known to archaeologists as hack silver. This was a major leap forward. Silver was portable, durable, and universally desired, solving many of the problems of barter. Now the grain merchant could sell his grain to anyone for silver, and then use that silver to buy the cedar wood he truly wanted. But the tyranny of barter was simply replaced by the tyranny of the scale. Every single piece of hack silver was an unknown quantity. Therefore, every single transaction, no matter how small, required a delicate and often contentious process of verification. A merchant would produce his portable bronze scale. The silver would be placed on one pan. A set of standardized stone weights would be placed on the other. But whose weights were to be trusted? Different cities and different empires used different systems. The process of weighing was a negotiation in itself. And then came the even greater problem: purity. Silver was a valuable commodity, and the temptation to cheat was immense. An unscrupulous trader could easily adulterate his silver, melting it with a cheaper, baser metal like lead to increase its weight. So, in addition to the scales, a merchant also needed the tools of a metallurgist. He would need to conduct a purity test for every transaction. This could involve touching the metal on a special stone to check its streak, or, more accurately, performing a small-scale cupellation, a process of heating the metal with lead in a ceramic cup to separate the precious and base metals. Every payment was, in effect, a small scientific experiment, a moment of deep suspicion. A simple trip to the market could involve dozens of these slow, inconvenient, and trust-destroying procedures. This system placed a hard ceiling on economic growth. It made casual, small-scale retail almost impossible. It limited the speed and the volume of trade, and most importantly, it created an economy where trust was a rare and precious commodity. A merchant could only truly trust the silver of his close associates, his family, or the members of his own guild.
The idea of a fast, anonymous, and universally accepted transaction with a stranger was a practical impossibility. The entire world of commerce was desperate for a solution, a technology that could replace the chaos of the scale and the suspicion of the purity test by a single, simple, and trustworthy guarantee of value. The stage was set for a revolution.
The revolution in money was not born in the great ancient heartlands of empire. It did not emerge from the bureaucratic traditions of Egypt or the sprawling markets of Mesopotamia. Instead, it was sparked in a small but fabulously wealthy kingdom that occupied a unique and powerful position on the chessboard of the ancient world. This was the kingdom of Lydia, located in the fertile river valleys of modern-day Western Anatolia, or Turkey. For centuries, Lydia was a bridge, a dynamic and often turbulent meeting point between two worlds. This unique strategic position, combined with an even more unique geological gift, made Lydia the perfect laboratory for economic innovation, the natural crucible in which the pressures of ancient trade would forge the world's first coins. Lydia's position was its power. To its east lay the great land-based empires of the Near East, first the Phrygians and later the mighty Persian Empire. These were ancient, wealthy, and sophisticated civilizations, the great producers and consumers of the East. To its west, across the Aegean Sea, lay the dynamic, chaotic, and rapidly expanding world of the Greek city-states. The Greeks were the great maritime traders of the age, their ships connecting a sprawling network of colonies and markets from the Black Sea to the shores of Italy. Lydia was the physical and cultural interface between these two worlds. Its capital, Sardis, became one of the most important commercial hubs of the 7th and 6th centuries BC, a place where the overland caravan routes from the east met the maritime trade routes from the west. On any given day, its marketplaces would have been a cosmopolitan fusion of cultures, a place where a Greek merchant haggling over prices with a Persian trader was a common sight. This position as the world's great middleman was an immense source of wealth, but it also presented a profound economic challenge. The Lydians had to navigate two different and often conflicting economic systems. The Eastern empires, while using weighed bullion, were still largely rooted in a palace-run, tribute-based economy. The Greek world, in contrast, was a burgeoning, decentralized network of private entrepreneurs and fiercely competitive city-states. A Lydian merchant had to be able to do business with both. They were at the epicenter of the friction that plagued the ancient economy. The daily, frustrating reality of weighing and testing the purity of countless different forms of silver and gold from dozens of different sources was a problem they faced more acutely than anyone else. They had the greatest possible incentive to invent a more efficient, more trustworthy system of exchange. But what truly made Lydia the unique birthplace of coinage was a remarkable geological accident. Flowing directly through the heart of their kingdom and the center of their capital city, Sardis, was the Pactolus River. According to Greek myth, this was the river in which the legendary King Midas washed his hands to rid himself of his golden touch, and in doing so, filled its sands with gold. The reality behind the myth is that the Pactolus and the surrounding mountains of the Tmolus Range were incredibly rich in a specific, naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. The Greeks called it electron, the white gold. We know it as electrum. This pale, whitish gold metal was the perfect raw material for a monetary revolution. It was, first and foremost, a precious metal, its value universally recognized. Secondly, it was locally abundant, giving the Lydian kings direct and sovereign control over the raw material for their new economy. They did not need to import it. But most importantly, its naturally occurring composition, a variable but distinct mix of gold, silver, and trace amounts of other metals, gave it a unique appearance that was difficult to counterfeit effectively. The Lydians had been gifted the perfect raw material, a substance that was both precious and crucially securable. For centuries, the Lydians had simply gathered this electrum as dust and nuggets from the riverbed, a practice that is likely the origin of the myth of the Golden Fleece. This raw electrum was traded as bullion, just like silver and gold elsewhere, subject to the same old problems of weighing and trust. The genius of the Lydian kings was to see the potential for something more. They understood that their kingdom's unique position, their acute need for a better system of exchange, and their direct control over a unique raw material had given them the perfect opportunity to create a new technology. They were the first to realize that the solution to the crisis of trust in trade was not to create a better scale or a better purity test, but to abolish the need for them entirely. They would take the raw, chaotic electrum of the Pactolus River and transform it into an instrument of absolute economic certainty.
The world was primed for a monetary revolution. The friction of the bullion economy was a constant brake on progress, and the Kingdom of Lydia possessed the motive, the opportunity, and the raw materials to invent a solution. That solution, when it arrived in the late 7th century BC, was an object of almost deceptive simplicity. A small, bean-shaped and rather unimpressive-looking lump of electrum. But this object was unlike any piece of precious metal that had come before it. It bore a mark, a symbol stamped into its face with incredible force. This was the Lydian Lion, the world's first true coin. And the innovation it represented was not metallurgical, but conceptual. The true technology of the coin was not the metal, it was the stamp. It was the birth of a radical new idea, that the value of money could be guaranteed not by a merchant scale, but by the authority of the state. The process of creating these first coins was a crucial bridge between the old world of bullion and the new world of money. It began with the raw electrum sourced from the Pactolus River. Lydian metalsmiths would have refined this raw material to a relatively consistent, though not yet perfect, standard of gold and silver content. This refined electrum was then cast into small, lumpy, bean-shaped blanks or flongs of a standardized weight. This first step was already an improvement on the chaotic hack-silver system. Creating pre-weighed, standardized units of metal was a significant step towards a more efficient economy. But it was the final, revolutionary step that changed everything. The blank piece of electrum was placed on a simple anvil. A die, likely made of hardened bronze and intricately carved with a design in negative relief, was placed on top of it. This die bore the image that would become the symbol of Lydian power. The head of a roaring lion, a potent and ancient symbol of royalty and strength. The back of the die was then struck with a heavy hammer, a single, forceful blow. The pressure of this strike would drive the soft, precious metal of the blank into the carved details of the die, permanently imprinting the lion's head onto its face. The reverse of the coin would simply bear the crude, rough impression of the punch used to hold the blank in place. The result was the Lydian stater, the first coin. What was the true meaning of this act? The lion's head was not mere decoration. It was the emblem, the official seal of the King of Lydia. Its presence on this lump of metal was a personal, royal guarantee. It was the king's promise, his solemn declaration to the world that this specific piece of electrum was of a guaranteed, state-certified weight and purity. With this single, violent act of striking, the Lydian king had completely short-circuited the ancient crisis of trust. A merchant receiving this coin no longer needed his scales. The weight was guaranteed by the stamp. He no longer needed his touchstone or his cupel. The purity was guaranteed by the stamp. The tyranny of the scale was over. The coin was an object that carried its own authenticity with it. This was a conceptual leap of immense genius. It was the invention of fiduciary value, the idea that the value of money is based on the trust and faith one has in the authority that issues it. The Lydian kings had created a technology for exporting trust. A merchant in a distant Greek port who had never met the king of Lydia could nevertheless trust his coin because he trusted the power and the reputation of the Lydian state that backed it. This transformed the very nature of ancient trade. Transactions could now be fast, efficient, and most importantly, anonymous. Any two strangers could now trade with perfect confidence, their trust placed not in each other, but in the authority of the distant king, whose lion roared from the face of the metal. This new technology also solved the problem of divisibility that had plagued the bullion economy. The Lydians didn't just produce the heavy one-stater coins. They produced an entire sophisticated fractional system, minting smaller coins that were worth a third, a sixth, a twelfth, and even down to a tiny 96th of a stater. For the first time in history, there was small change. This was perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the entire invention for the daily life of the common person. It made possible, for the first time, a true retail economy. A baker could now sell a loaf of bread for a small, standardized coin without the need for a complex barter exchange or the impossible task of weighing a tiny scrap of silver. Standardized prices could be set, and a true market, in the modern sense of the word, could be born. The Lydian Lion was more than a new form of currency. It was a piece of state propaganda, a tiny metal billboard that traveled the known world, proclaiming the power, the wealth, and the authority of the Lydian kingdom. It was a technological, political, and psychological revolution, all captured in a single, elegant solution. By stamping his promise onto a piece of metal, the Lydian king had not just invented money, he had invented the very idea of a modern, state-backed currency, the fundamental tool that would build the great empires of the future and the global economy of today.
The invention of coinage was like pouring gasoline on the embers of the ancient economy. The old systems of barter and bullion were slow, thick, and viscous like honey. Coinage was a fluid, a liquid medium that could flow with a speed and freedom that was previously unimaginable. The Lydian Lion was not just a convenient tool, it was a great accelerator, a disruptive technology that fundamentally altered the dynamics of commerce. Its immediate effect was to dramatically increase the velocity of money, the speed at which it could circulate through the economy. This acceleration, in turn, supercharged ancient trade, fostered the growth of new kinds of markets, and gave rise to a new, powerful class of private entrepreneurs who would ride the wave of this monetary revolution. The first and most obvious impact was on the speed of transactions. We must return to the marketplace of the pre-coinage world. A merchant making 10 sales in a day might have to perform 10 separate, time-consuming weighings and 10 separate, difficult purity tests. His entire day would be consumed by the friction of the transaction process itself. Now, consider the Lydian marketplace after the invention of coinage. The merchant simply had to count. A transaction that might have taken half an hour of haggling and testing could now be completed in a matter of seconds. The coin, as a trusted, state-guaranteed unit, eliminated the need for verification. This was a revolutionary increase in efficiency. A merchant could now conduct 100 transactions in the time it used to take to conduct 10. This exponential increase in the speed of exchange meant that more goods could be bought and sold, more wealth could be generated, and the entire economy could operate at a much higher and more dynamic frequency. This new efficiency gave birth to an entirely new kind of economic space, the retail market. The existence of small, standardized fractional coins, the thirds, the sixths, the twelfths, was a breakthrough for the common person. For the first time, a baker, a butcher, or a potter could set a fixed, standardized price for their everyday goods.
A loaf of bread now had a price that could be paid with a single, small coin without the need to barter an equivalent value in onions or to slice off a microscopic, unweighable sliver of silver. This was the birth of the price tag, the birth of cash-based, everyday shopping. The great agora, the central marketplace of the city, was transformed from a place of bulk barter and wholesale bullion exchange into a recognizable retail environment, a bustling hub where citizens of all classes could participate in a fluid, monetized economy. This new monetized world created a new kind of economic actor, the professional merchant or capellos. While long-distance traders had always existed, coinage empowered a new class of domestic middle-class entrepreneurs. A man could now accumulate wealth in a form that was portable, anonymous, and universally accepted. This wealth, in the form of coins, could easily be stored, easily transported, and, most importantly, easily reinvested. A successful merchant could use his profits to buy more goods, to hire employees, to invest in a larger workshop, or even to begin lending money at interest, becoming a nascent banker. Coinage was the perfect fuel for the engine of private enterprise. It created a more level playing field, where a clever and ambitious individual, not just the landed aristocrat, could build a fortune. This was the beginning of a true middle class, a society whose status was not based on the ownership of land, but on the accumulation of money. The impact on international trade was just as profound. Lydian and soon after Greek coins became a highly sought-after international currency. A Greek ship captain sailing to Egypt no longer had to carry a clumsy and difficult-to-trade cargo of wine or olive oil. He could now carry a small, heavy chest of trusted silver coins, an asset whose value was recognized and accepted in every major port of the Mediterranean. Coins became the great lubricant of international commerce. They simplified the complex process of foreign exchange. They made the calculation of profits and losses more precise, and they created the first truly international monetary system. The rapid adoption of coinage by the Greek city-states and their colonies created a vast, unified economic zone, a world bound together by the shared language of money. This great acceleration is clearly visible in the archaeological record. In the centuries following the invention of coinage, we see a dramatic explosion in the volume of traded goods across the Mediterranean. The number of shipwrecks archaeologists have found from this period increases exponentially, a grim but reliable indicator of a massive increase in the sheer volume of maritime traffic. The Lydian invention had not just made trade easier, it had made more trade possible. By solving the ancient crisis of trust and removing the friction from the system, the coin had unleashed the full pent-up potential of the ancient economy, creating a wave of commercial prosperity that would lift the entire Greek world and lay the financial foundations for the classical Golden Age.
The acceleration of private trade was a spectacular but perhaps secondary consequence of the invention of coinage. The true, world-changing genius of the Lydian Revolution was not what it did for the individual merchant, but what it did for the centralized state. The king who stamped his lion's head onto a piece of electrum was not just facilitating commerce as a public service, he was forging a powerful new tool of statecraft. Coinage was a technology that allowed rulers, for the first time, to systematically tap into the wealth of their kingdom, to create a centralized treasury of unprecedented liquidity, and to fund the single most important instrument of state power, a professional, paid army. The Lydian Lion was not just a revolution in the marketplace, it was a revolution in the very nature of government. The first and most important of these new state powers was the rationalization of taxation. In the pre-coinage world, taxation was a logistical nightmare. A ruler had to collect his revenues in kind. Tax collectors would travel the land, taking a percentage of every farmer's grain, every potter's pots, and every weaver's cloth. This created a treasury that was not a vault of money, but a sprawling, chaotic collection of perishable goods and bulky commodities. It was incredibly inefficient to collect, difficult to store, and almost impossible to redistribute effectively. How does a king in his capital use 1,000 amphorae of wine collected from a distant province to pay for the construction of a new city wall? The entire system of state finance was crippled by the same logistical friction that plagued the barter economy. Coinage provided a breathtakingly elegant solution. The king could now demand that taxes be paid not in grain or in chickens, but in the very coins that he himself had issued. This was a stroke of genius. It instantly created a massive state-sponsored demand for the new currency, forcing every citizen to participate in the monetized economy, whether they wanted to or not. A farmer now had to sell a portion of his crop for cash to be able to pay his taxes. This single act dramatically accelerated the monetization of the entire society, and the result was a revolution in state finance. The royal treasury was no longer a collection of overflowing warehouses. It was a single, secure vault filled with a substance that was uniform, durable, portable, and above all, liquid. This new liquid treasury gave the Lydian kings a form of centralized financial power that was previously unimaginable. They now had a fund of pure, abstract value that could be deployed with incredible speed and precision to achieve any state objective. If they wanted to build a new temple or a new road, they no longer had to conscript labor or gather disparate materials through the tribute system. They could now simply hire the architects and the workers and buy the materials, paying for it all with the standardized, trusted coins from their treasury. This was the birth of the state budget, the birth of modern fiscal policy. It was a tool that allowed the state to mobilize the resources of its kingdom with an efficiency that the old palace economies could only dream of. But the most potent and world-changing application of this new financial power was in the funding of warfare. The armies of the ancient world had traditionally been citizen levies, farmers who would leave their fields to fight for a short campaign season before returning for the harvest. This system was cheap, but it was also unreliable and limited in its scope. A more effective but far more expensive option was to hire professional soldiers, mercenaries, who would fight for pay. The problem was how to pay them. Paying a large army with sacks of grain or bolts of cloth was a logistical nightmare. Coinage solved this problem perfectly. A king could now pay his soldiers in small, portable, high-value, and universally accepted coins. A soldier, in turn, could use this coin to buy whatever he needed, food, wine, equipment, from the merchants and camp followers that would inevitably spring up around any large army. This was a military economic revolution. It allowed rulers for the first time to raise and maintain large, professional, full-time armies. These armies were not tied to the harvest season. They could campaign year-round. Their loyalty was not to a piece of land, but to the king who paid them their silver. The Lydian kings and their Greek neighbors who quickly copied the invention used their new coin-fueled treasuries to hire tens of thousands of Greek hoplite mercenaries, the most effective fighting force of the day. This new model of a professional, cash-paid army would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the ancient world. It was this model that Philip of Macedon would use to conquer Greece, and that his son, Alexander the Great, would use to conquer the known world. It was this model that would be perfected by the Roman Empire, whose ability to systematically tax its provinces in cash and pay its legions in coin was the absolute bedrock of its long-lasting military supremacy. The entire history of ancient warfare, from the 6th century BC onwards, is the history of the coin-fueled state. The Lydian kings, in seeking a way to simplify trade, had inadvertently invented the primary financial instrument for building and sustaining an empire.
The Lydian invention of coinage was too powerful, too elegant, and too useful to remain a local phenomenon. It was an idea whose time had come, a solution to a universal problem. And from its crucible in Western Anatolia, the concept of coinage spread with the speed of a wildfire, infecting every major civilization it came into contact with. This was not a conquest of armies, but a conquest of ideas. First the Greeks, then the Persians, and eventually the entire ancient world would adopt and adapt this revolutionary technology. The story of this rapid viral spread is the ultimate testament to the invention's power, a clear sign that the Lydians had not just created a new tool, but had unleashed a new and irreversible paradigm for the global economy. The first and most immediate adopters of coinage were the Lydians' closest neighbors and most intimate trading partners, the Ionian Greeks. The Greek city-states on the coast of Anatolia, like Miletus, Ephesus, and Phocaea, were some of the most dynamic and commercially adventurous societies of the age. They were at the very heart of the Mediterranean trade network, and their merchants would have been among the first to encounter the new Lydian coins in the marketplaces of Sardis. They immediately recognized the genius of the invention and its immense potential for their own maritime commerce. Almost immediately after the first Lydian staters appeared, these Greek cities began to strike their own electrum coins, often using the same weight standards but stamping them with their own unique civic emblems, a seal for Phocaea, a stag for Ephesus. But the Ionian Greeks did more than just copy the Lydian idea. They perfected it. They were the ones who carried the technology of coinage across the sea to mainland Greece. And it was in a city that was rapidly becoming the commercial and cultural center of the Greek world, Athens, that coinage would take its next evolutionary leap. The Athenians, with their state-owned silver mines at Laurion, abandoned the clumsy and inconsistent electrum and began to strike coins of pure, high-grade silver. And they stamped these coins with an image that would become the first truly international, universally recognized and trusted currency, the iconic Owl of Athens. The Athenian silver tetradrachm, with its image of the goddess Athena on one side and her wise owl on the other, was produced to such a consistent weight and high standard of purity that it became the US dollar of the ancient Mediterranean. An Athenian owl was accepted at face value from the shores of the Black Sea to the markets of Egypt, a testament to the power of a trusted, state-guaranteed brand. The idea then spread like wildfire throughout the Greek world. Every major city-state, from Corinth with its Pegasus to Aegina with its sea turtle, began to issue its own distinctive coinage. This explosion of minting was not just a matter of civic pride, it was an essential tool for any state that wished to compete in the increasingly monetized Greek economy. Coins were used to fund their navies, to pay for their public works, and to project their identity across the sea. The minting of coins became a declaration of sovereignty, a statement that a city was a major player in the world of international trade. The next great leap for coinage came from the very empire that had conquered its inventors. In the mid-6th century BC, the rising Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great swallowed the Lydian kingdom. But the Persians were not just conquerors, they were brilliant administrators. They recognized the power of the Lydian invention as a tool for managing their own vast multi-continental empire. Under the Emperor Darius the Great, the Persians created the world's first truly imperial bimetallic currency system. They issued a heavy, high-purity gold coin, the daric, which became the standard for high-value international transactions. Alongside it, they minted a smaller silver coin, the siglos, for everyday commerce within the empire. This was a revolutionary step. The Persian state used this standardized currency to rationalize and centralize the administration of their empire. The regional governors, the satraps, no longer had to collect a chaotic mess of tribute in kind. Instead, they collected taxes in the standardized imperial currency and sent that cash to the central treasury. The king could then use this immense liquid wealth to fund his massive armies, to pay for his vast bureaucracy, and to finance colossal building projects like the Royal Road and the palaces at Persepolis. The Persians had taken the Lydian idea and scaled it up to the level of imperial administration that was unprecedented in human history. The coin was now not just a tool of trade, but the primary instrument of empire. From Greece and Persia, the idea continued its inexorable conquest of the world. It traveled with Alexander the Great's armies all the way to India. It was adopted by the Celtic tribes of barbarian Europe, who created their own beautiful, abstract versions of Greek coins. And, most famously, it was perfected by the Roman Empire, whose standardized silver denarius became the universal currency of an even larger world for centuries to come. The viral spread of this single idea, born in a small Anatolian kingdom, was complete. It had proven itself to be an indispensable technology for any state that wished to manage a complex economy, project its power, and participate in the new, interconnected world that the coin itself had helped to create.
The invention of coinage had transformed the kingdom of Lydia into an economic superpower. And this immense new wealth found its ultimate expression in the figure of its last and most legendary king, Croesus. Ascending to the throne in the mid-6th century BC, Croesus was a man who presided over a golden age of Lydian power and prosperity. His name, even to this day, is a byword for unimaginable wealth. He was the world's first true money king, a ruler whose power and international prestige were built almost entirely on the revolutionary monetary technology he had inherited and perfected. But the story of Croesus is also a profound and timeless cautionary tale, a Greek tragedy played out on the stage of geopolitics. It is the story of a man who came to believe that his immense financial power was insurmountable, a fatal hubris that would lead him to misjudge a rising power and bring his own golden kingdom crashing down in ruins. Croesus's first and most important contribution to the Lydian Revolution was a major technological refinement. The early electrum coins, while revolutionary, had a significant flaw. The naturally occurring alloy had a variable gold-to-silver ratio. This meant that two coins of the same weight could have different intrinsic values, a lingering element of uncertainty in the economy. Croesus solved this problem. He perfected a metallurgical technique, likely using a process of cementation with salt, to separate the gold and silver from the electrum ore on a massive industrial scale. This was a breakthrough of immense significance. For the first time, he could issue coins of a guaranteed, standardized purity in both pure gold and pure silver. This was the birth of the world's first bimetallic currency system, a standard that would dominate the global economy for the next 2,500 years. The Croesoid staters, with their confronting heads of a lion and a bull, were the new gold standard of their day, a trusted and universally accepted currency that further enhanced Lydian's commercial dominance. The wealth that this system generated for Croesus was simply staggering. The royal treasury at Sardis became the wonder of the ancient world. He used this immense liquid wealth to project Lydian power, conquering the Greek city-states of the Ionian coast and expanding his empire to encompass almost all of Western Anatolia. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, and he made legendary, almost unbelievably large donations of pure gold to the great Greek sanctuaries, most famously the Oracle at Delphi. His name became a legend. It was this very success, however, that seems to have bred a fatal arrogance. The historian Herodotus tells the famous story of the Athenian statesman Solon visiting the court of Croesus. The king, in a display of immense pride, showed Solon his treasury and asked if the wise man had ever seen a happier and more fortunate man. Solon, in his wisdom, refused to call Croesus the happiest of men, warning him that the fortunes of life are fickle and that no man can be judged happy until he is dead. For Croesus, a man who measured power in gold, this was an incomprehensible answer. He had come to equate his immense financial resources with absolute security. The great test of this belief was rising on his eastern border. The Persian Empire, under its brilliant and relentlessly ambitious founder Cyrus the Great, was consolidating its power at a terrifying rate. Croesus, seeing this new power as both a threat and an opportunity, decided to act. He sought the advice of the Oracle at Delphi, the most famous source of prophecy in the ancient world. The Oracle, in its famously ambiguous style, gave him the answer he wanted to hear. "If you cross the Halys River," it declared, "you will destroy a great empire." Convinced that this prophesied the defeat of Persia, Croesus marshaled his immense, coin-fueled army. He had his vast treasury of gold and silver, which allowed him to hire tens of thousands of the finest Greek and Egyptian mercenaries. On paper, his army was a magnificent and incredibly expensive force. He crossed the Halys River, the border between his kingdom and the Persian sphere of influence, and engaged the armies of Cyrus. The first battle was a bloody stalemate. As winter approached, Croesus, following the traditional rules of warfare, retired to his capital at Sardis, confident that the campaign season was over. He even disbanded his mercenary army, planning to rehire them in the spring. But Cyrus did not play by the old rules. In a stroke of strategic genius, he marched his army through the harsh Anatolian winter and appeared unexpectedly before the walls of Sardis. Croesus was caught completely off guard. He hastily assembled his Lydian cavalry, but Cyrus, in another brilliant tactical move, placed his baggage camels at the front of his line. The Lydian horses, terrified by the unfamiliar smell of the camels, panicked and routed. The Lydian army was defeated, the city of Sardis was besieged and captured, and Croesus himself was taken prisoner. He had, as the oracle had so cleverly predicted, destroyed a great empire, his own. The story of Croesus is the ultimate lesson in the limits of economic power. He had the finest currency and the largest treasury in the world. He could afford the best soldiers money could buy. But his wealth had made him arrogant and strategically complacent. He failed to appreciate the superior military strategy, the brilliant leadership, and the immense battle-hardened manpower of the rising Persian Empire. He learned too late that money alone cannot guarantee victory. The Lydian Revolution had given him the greatest economic weapon in the world, but it was not enough.
The Lydian Revolution was not just an upheaval in the marketplace or the state treasury. It was an upheaval in the human mind. The invention of coinage did more than just accelerate trade. It fundamentally rewired the way human beings thought about value, about wealth, and about their relationship with society. The small, stamped pieces of metal introduced a level of abstraction into human affairs that was previously unimaginable. They were a mental technology as much as a physical one. This psychological revolution, while less tangible than the rise of armies or the growth of markets, was arguably the most profound and enduring legacy of the Lydian idea. The coin created the very cognitive architecture upon which our modern economy is built. Before coinage, wealth was concrete, tangible, and deeply personal. It was your flock of sheep, your fields of barley, your storehouse of wine, or the gold rings on your arm. Value was intrinsic to the object itself. An ox was valuable because it could plow a field and provide meat. A jar of oil was valuable because it could provide light and sustenance. This was an economy of things. But the coin was something radically new. It was, in essence, a promise, an abstraction. Its value was not just in the metal it contained, but in the trust placed in the authority that stamped it. This separated, for the first time, the idea of value from the idea of a useful object. The coin had no utility in itself. You could not eat it or wear it. Its only function was to be a symbol, a carrier of abstract, quantifiable value. This abstraction had powerful psychological consequences. It allowed for the creation of a new concept, fungibility, the idea that all forms of value could be converted into a single, universal, and interchangeable medium. A cow, a pot, a day's labor, and a piece of land could now all be measured and expressed in a common language, the language of money. This allowed for a new kind of rational, mathematical thinking about the world. A farmer could now calculate his profits and losses in a precise, numerical way. A merchant could compare the relative value of disparate goods from different parts of the world using a single, common denominator. This was the birth of true accounting, of the balance sheet, and of a mindset that saw the world not just as a collection of things, but as a system of quantifiable values. Coinage also revolutionized the concept of wealth. Wealth was no longer tied to the land or to heavy, cumbersome commodities. It was now portable, anonymous, and liquid. A man could convert his entire estate into a small, heavy chest of coins and travel with it to the other end of the world, his wealth instantly recognized and accepted. This created a new kind of freedom and a new kind of social mobility. A person's worth was no longer solely defined by their birth or their land, but by the money they could accumulate. This was both liberating and terrifying. It created the opportunity for a merchant class to rise to immense power, but it also created a new kind of poverty, the state of having no money, which was a more abstract and arguably more brutal form of destitution than simply having a poor harvest. Furthermore, this new abstract form of wealth enabled the birth of even more abstract financial technologies. The concept of debt became rationalized. Instead of being a complex social obligation, a debt was now a precise numerical amount owed in a specific currency. And this in turn gave rise to the systematic practice of charging interest. Money could now be used to make more money, not just by trading in goods, but by the simple act of lending. The great temples of the Greek world, and later the first Roman bankers, became major financial institutions, lending money at interest to fund everything from a farmer's new crop to a merchant's overseas voyage. This was the birth of finance capitalism, a system entirely dependent on the existence of a trusted, abstract, and quantifiable form of money. Finally, the coin created a new and powerful psychological relationship between the individual and the state. In the old economy, the king's power was distant and often indirect. But now, every citizen who used a coin was in a small but significant way participating in a state-run system. They were holding in their hand a daily, tangible reminder of the king's authority, his promise, and his power. The symbols stamped on the coins, the Lydian Lion, the Athenian owl, the Persian king, were not just guarantees, they were acts of propaganda, tiny, portable monuments that circulated the ideology of the state through the veins of the economy. Money became one of the most powerful tools for building a shared civic identity. To use the coin was to be part of the system. The Lydian Revolution, in the end, was not just about making it easier to buy and sell. It was about creating a new mental framework, a new language of abstract value that would allow for the birth of a more complex, more rational, and more powerful kind of world.
Our investigation began with a single, crude, and almost unimpressive-looking object, the Lydian Lion, the world's first coin. We sought to understand how this small piece of stamped metal could unleash a global revolution. Having journeyed through the inefficient, trust-starved world of the pre-coinage economy, and having deconstructed the political, economic, and military consequences of this Lydian innovation, the evidence is now clear and the verdict can be rendered. The invention of coinage was a disruptive technology of the highest order, a brilliant solution to the ancient world's crisis of commercial trust. By placing a state's solemn promise onto a piece of metal, the Lydians did not just create a new form of money, they created the financial and psychological architecture for the modern world. We have established that the pre-coinage world of barter and bullion was crippled by a fundamental lack of trust and efficiency. Every transaction was a slow, suspicious, and costly negotiation. The genius of the Lydian solution was to understand that the problem was not metallurgical, but conceptual. The revolutionary innovation was not the electrum itself, but the stamp, the royal seal that transformed a simple commodity into a state-guaranteed instrument of value. This was, in essence, the invention of trust as a scalable technology. Our investigation has demonstrated that this invention acted as a great accelerator. It dramatically increased the velocity of money, making commerce faster, more efficient, and more anonymous than ever before. It enabled the birth of true retail markets through the use of fractional currency, empowering small businesses and a new middle class. It provided the fuel for a new, dynamic, and empowered private sector, supercharging the entire ancient trade network of the Mediterranean and Near East. Crucially, we have shown that the true beneficiary of this revolution was the centralized state. We have seen how coinage transformed the clumsy, inefficient system of in-kind taxation into a rational, cash-based fiscal policy. This created liquid treasuries of unprecedented power, allowing kings to fund massive public works and, most critically, to pay for professional, standing armies. This direct line from coinage to the funding of military power was perhaps the most significant political consequence of the entire revolution, a model that would be perfected by the great empires of Persia, Macedon, and Rome. Therefore, the final conclusion of our investigation is this: the Lydian Revolution was the pivotal moment when economic power was both rationalized and centralized. It created a tool that simultaneously liberated the private merchant and empowered the state tax collector. It replaced the friction of negotiation with the fluid certainty of a trusted currency. By solving the problem of trust, the Lydians did not just make it easier to trade, they created the very possibility of the complex, cash-based, state-managed economy that would go on to define Western civilization. The kingdom of Lydia has vanished. Its great king, Croesus, is a figure of myth, and the original Lydian Lion coins are now priceless museum artifacts. But the revolution they started is all around us. It is in the very fabric of our daily lives, so fundamental and so ubiquitous that it has become almost invisible. Every time we buy a coffee, receive a paycheck, or pay a tax, we are operating within the intellectual and economic framework that was born in that small Anatolian kingdom 2.5 millennia ago. The Lydian Revolution was not just a historical event, it is the enduring operating system of our modern world. The Lydian coin was the killer app of its day. Its spread was not of conquest, but of voluntary, enthusiastic adoption. The idea was simply too good, too powerful to ignore. It provided a common language of value that could transcend cultural and political boundaries, weaving the disparate economies of the ancient world into a single, interconnected network. It was a technology that created order out of chaos, a system that allowed for a level of complexity and scale in human interaction that had never before been possible. The concepts that this small piece of metal introduced into the world are now the bedrock of our civilization. The idea of abstract, fungible value, the principle of a state-backed fiduciary currency, the technologies of systematic taxation and cash-paid labor. These are the pillars that support not just our economies, but our governments, our laws, and even our individual psychologies. The coin taught us to think in numbers, to quantify the world, to see all of human activity through the rational lens of profit and loss. It created a new kind of human being, the economic actor. The tiny, roaring lion on the face of that first coin was more than just a royal emblem. It was the symbol of a new kind of power, an invisible king that would come to govern human affairs with an authority that few emperors could ever hope to match. It was the power of money itself. The story of the Lydian Revolution is therefore the ultimate story of ancient trade, because it is the story of the invention of the very tool that would make all future trade possible on a global scale. It is a profound reminder that the most powerful forces in history are not always armies or empires, but a single, brilliant idea that changes the way we see and measure.